They said I'd never make it without them. You'll come crawling back. My older brother laughed. I just blocked everyone. 6 months later, he showed up at my work when I didn't even look up from the spreadsheet when the receptionist's voice crackled through the intercom. Hey Tom, there's someone here asking for you. Says he's your brother? For a moment I didn't move. The words felt distant. Like someone had pressed rewind on a part of my life I thought I'd buried. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, and my heart thudded once before settling into a cold, deliberate rhythm. I stood up. Walked to the glass wall that separated my office from the lobby. And there he was. Nick. My older brother. Same hunched shoulders. Same smug scowl, except now it looked worn, sagged under the weight of something he wasn't used to carrying. Desperation. He hadn't seen me yet. He was too busy scanning the polished floors like they might offer him an answer. I watched him for a second longer, a quiet satisfaction tightening in my chest. Because 6 months ago, he looked me in the eye, laughed, and said, You'll come crawling back. I didn't say a word then. I just stood up from the dinner table, nodded once, and walked out of the house I grew up in, the family I thought I needed, and a life that had kept me small. Blocked everyone. Mom, dad, cousins, all of them. Deleted my social media. Quit my job. Left town with 2 duffel bags and a pair of worn-out sneakers. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I just disappeared. That was the night I stopped trying to win their approval. I wasn't crawling back. But now someone was. It didn't start with some huge fight. It never does. The first signs were always subtle, quiet little cuts that added up over time. Nick was a master at that. Not screaming or throwing punches, just those perfectly timed digs that slid under your skin and stayed there. Death by 1,000 smirks. When I was 12, I told him I wanted to be an architect. I'd built this little city out of Legos, skyscrapers, bridges, even a tiny train station. He laughed for 10 full seconds, then said, You're too slow for that stuff. You'd be lucky to be the guy holding the stop sign on a construction site. That was the first one I remember. I didn't cry or anything. I just quietly disassembled the whole thing that night, and never brought it up again. It became a pattern. I'd say I wanted to try out for soccer, he'd say. You run like a scared turtle. I got excited about a summer job at a bookstore, he said. Oh wow, you're climbing the ladder, huh? Next stop, cashier of the month. Even when I succeeded, it wasn't enough. I graduated college while he was still bouncing between half-hearted jobs and half-finished business ideas, and somehow I was still the family disappointment. He'd call me Little Tommy, in front of everyone, even when I was pushing 30. Our parents didn't help. They'd laugh along like he was just teasing. That's just how Nick is. They'd say, like that excused it. But the worst part? I bought into it. I believed them. I stayed close. I answered the late-night calls. I lent money. I helped Nick move 4 times. I stayed in a job I hated because it was close to home, and they made me feel like the world outside was too big for me. I ignored all the signs that they didn't take me seriously. That they never would. Until that night. The night I told them I was finally leaving. I had found a job opportunity in another state. Entry level, yeah, but it had real growth potential. It wasn't much, but it felt like mine, the first thing I'd found on my own, without anyone else's permission. When I said it out loud at dinner, the room went quiet. Then Nick leaned back in his chair and let out that same laugh. The one I'd heard since I was a kid. You! Move out of state, he said, shaking his head. You'll come crawling back in a month. Bro, don't embarrass yourself. My parents didn't say a word. Just like always. So I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded. And when I got home that night, I blocked everyone. Because that moment, finally, was enough. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't pack either. Not at first. I just sat in the dark on the edge of my bed, phone face down beside me, playing the words on repeat. You'll come crawling back. It wasn't just the insult, it was the certainty in his voice. The ease with which he dismissed me, like my dreams were nothing more than a passing phase he'd already outgrown. And the worst part? The silence from everyone else. Not a single. That's enough, Nick. Not even from Mom. That's when I realized I'd been asking the wrong people for permission my whole life. So I stood up, opened my closet, grabbed the 2 duffel bags I used for weekend trips and started filling them. A few shirts, a couple pairs of jeans, my laptop, my sketchbook. It didn't take long. I didn't have much, and I was okay with that. What I did have was fire. At 4:17 a.m., I typed out a message to my boss at the logistics job I'd had for 5 years. 5 years of clocking in, being overlooked, and covering for people who never remembered my name. I told him I was quitting. Effective immediately. No explanations. Then I shut off my phone. Not airplane mode, off. Permanently. No texts. No guilt trips. No last-minute calls from my mother asking if I was being too sensitive. I got in my car, an old silver Civic with a stubborn check engine light, and drove. No music. Just the hum of the road and the sound of my own breathing. Somewhere around sunrise, I passed the state line. I didn't look back. The new city wasn't glamorous. It wasn't anything, really, a medium-sized place with enough coffee shops, construction zones, and people who didn't know my name to feel like freedom. I rented a room from an older guy named Dennis who didn't ask questions. Got a barista job at a cafe with mismatched chairs and a manager who actually said, "Thank you." And every night, after my shift, I'd sketch plans, blueprints, buildings I'd always wanted to design. It wasn't much, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving under someone else's shadow. I was living in my own light. There's a kind of silence you don't hear until you've left behind the noise. Back home, it was always someone's voice pushing into my day, Nick's sarcastic drawl, my parents' tired sighs, or the heavy quiet between insults that felt just as loud. But in that little rented room above Dennis's garage, the silence was mine. Clean. Still. Honest. The mornings were early, 5:30 a.m. shifts at the cafe, milk frothing and muffin restocking. Not glamorous, but good. I liked the rhythm. The way the regulars started remembering my name. One guy, Julian, wore the same gray hoodie every day and always tipped in exact change. One morning he caught me sketching behind the counter during a lull. "You any good?" he asked. I shrugged. Still figuring that out. He studied the drawing, a rough outline of a community center I'd made up in my head. "That's not just figuring it out," he said. "That's something." Turns out, Julian was a contractor. Small firm. Just a few guys doing local builds. Next thing I knew, he asked if I wanted to help him out on weekends. Said they were designing a youth shelter from scratch and could use someone with a good eye. I didn't even hesitate. I started tagging along to site visits, sitting in on calls, absorbing everything I could. During breaks, I'd quietly redraw the blueprints they showed me, adding little touches they hadn't thought of. At first they just smiled, but then they started using them. Within 2 months, I was part of the design meetings. Within 3, I had a paid internship with the firm. Dennis gave me a discount on rent when he saw how late I stayed up working. "You're the first tenant I've had who makes insomnia look productive," he joked. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just busy, I was building something that mattered. And it was all fueled by spite and a very specific memory, my brother's laugh. That smug, dismissive sound still echoed in my head every time I pushed through a tough day. He said I'd come crawling back. So I'd built a life on standing tall. It was a Wednesday. Nothing special. I was at the office. We had just moved into a newer space downtown, still smelled like fresh drywall and new carpet glue. I was reviewing a layout for a community rec center, half listening to Julian explain the zoning hiccups, when I caught something in my peripheral vision. Movement. Out in the hallway, past the glass front. A figure pacing near the reception desk. At first, I didn't think much of it. Could have been a client waiting. Or a delivery guy. But something about the body language, the tension in the shoulders, the restless shifting from foot to foot, pulled at something in my gut. I stood up and took a step toward the glass wall. And then I saw him. Nick. My brother. I hadn't seen him in 6 months. But I knew that frame. That crooked posture that used to tower over me. Except now, he looked smaller. Like someone had turned down the volume on him. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were sunken. His hair was longer than I remembered, but not in a stylish way, more like he hadn't cared enough to get it cut. He looked lost. Tom? Julian said behind me. I didn't answer. Just walked slowly to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hallway. Nick turned. His eyes widened, surprise, maybe even relief, but he didn't speak right away. I just stared at him. Let him sit in the silence. Hey, he said finally, voice raspier than I remembered. You look different. I am. There was a pause. He glanced around, unsure of his footing. This is where you work. I nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more, but words caught in his throat. I decided to let him twist a little longer. He kept looking at the floor. Couldn't hold eye contact for more than a few seconds. That alone was jarring. This was the same guy who used to tower over me, physically and otherwise. He once stood at a family barbecue and told a group of laughing cousins that I'd probably end up back here in a year, begging for a job mowing his lawn. I remember the way his words sliced through the air like he believed them so deeply, no one dared question it. Now he looked like he'd forgotten how to carry his own weight. I didn't know where else to go, he finally said, still not looking at me. I didn't respond. I just waited. I've learned silence is a powerful tool. It makes people feel it, and often they tell you more than they meant to. I lost the apartment, he continued. Things with Tara fell apart. Then I got laid off, and it all just sort of collapsed. He lifted his eyes, and for the first time in years, they didn't hold any mockery. Just exhaustion. I remembered you said you were leaving. I didn't believe you'd actually do it. And when you did, well, I said, finally breaking my own silence. He winced a little. I thought maybe you'd come back eventually. You said I'd crawl back. He let out a weak laugh, then nodded. Yeah. I did. I took a slow breath. Everything in me wanted to savor this moment, because I dreamed of it. Fantasized about the day he'd come to me, needing something, while I stood steady and whole. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like clarity. You didn't just doubt me, Nick. You wanted me to fail. And now that I haven't, you're standing here hoping I forgot all that? I'm not proud of it, he muttered. I tilted my head. But you thought I'd be soft enough to help anyway? He looked down again. Bingo. For a while, neither of us said anything. He stood there with his shoulders hunched, hands shoved into the pockets of a threadbare jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His shoelaces were uneven. His confidence, once bloated and overflowing, was nowhere to be found. I studied him, not with pity, not with vengeance, but with an almost clinical distance. Like I was watching a sculpture slowly crumble from the inside out. This was the man who used to sneer at my ambition. The one who once told our dad that I wasn't built for real life. Who told me during a Christmas dinner that dreaming big was a waste of everyone's time. Who got praise for every half-baked idea while I worked in the shadows, unnoticed, uncheered. And now here he was. In front of my office. In my city. With nowhere else to go. I'm not here to start anything, he finally said, voice low. I guess I didn't expect you to actually make it. He said it like it was some kind of miracle. Like I'd won the lottery instead of clawing my way up from nothing. You think this happened overnight? I asked, not angry, just curious. You think I got lucky? No, he admitted. I think I just never really saw you. I nodded. No. You didn't. And the worst part is I did. I saw myself. I believed in me. You all just taught me to be ashamed of that. He looked like I'd hit him. Not hard, but precisely. Like a needle instead of a hammer. I stepped aside, motioning for him to follow. He did quietly. We passed the front desk, the hallway where project boards lined the walls, and finally reached the small glass conference room where I took my meetings. My name was on the plaque outside. Thomas Garrison, Associate Designer. I let him sit. I didn't offer him water. I didn't try to make him comfortable. "Why now?" I asked. He hesitated. "I heard from someone back home that you were doing well. They didn't know where you went, but word got around. Then my job laid me off. Tara moved out. I thought maybe you'd—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Didn't have to. You thought I'd help," I said. "After everything." His face flushed a dull red. "Look, I know I was hard on you." "You weren't hard on me, Nick," I said, my voice sharp but calm. "You spent your whole life tearing me down. You made sure everyone else laughed when you did. You didn't just doubt me. You enjoyed making me feel small." He went quiet again. I leaned forward slightly. "And now I'm supposed to forget all that because you're having a rough patch?" "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said quickly. I wanted to see if there was still a bridge between us." A strange quiet fell between us. The kind that presses in on your chest like a weighted blanket. And then I smiled. Not wide. Not cruel. Just steady. "There isn't," I said simply. "That bridge burned the night you laughed and told me I'd come crawling back." "I didn't." "You did." He blinked like he wasn't sure if he heard me right. And in that moment I realized something important. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need him to suffer. I didn't even need an apology. I had already won. Not because he was at rock bottom, but because I wasn't. I was standing on the other side of the life he said I'd never have. And I didn't owe him a thing. Nick sat there for a long time, silent. I could see the shift in him, like he was finally beginning to understand that this wasn't a scene in one of his old stories, the ones where he played the victim and I played the fool. This was real. And I wasn't the same brother he used to toy with. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence breathe. "I didn't realize," he began, then trailed off. "I guess I thought we'd always just be family." I tilted my head. "Is that what we were?" He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. Family, at least the way he meant it, was a word used like a leash. He used it to pull me back, to guilt me, to mask his contempt in something more palatable. But the truth was, I'd been more alone with them than I'd ever felt in any stranger's city. I had more support now from Julian, Dennis, even the woman at the sandwich place who always remembered my name and asked about my projects, than I'd ever had from my own brother. And yet, sitting there across from him, I felt nothing. Not hate. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. "Do you know what changed?" I asked him. He looked up. "I stopped asking for approval. Stopped waiting to be seen. I stopped making room for people who only showed up to tear me down." He looked away. Embarrassed. Maybe ashamed. I wasn't sure. "Back then," I continued, "I thought being the bigger person meant keeping the door open. Letting things go. Making excuses for the way you treated me. I thought that was strength." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "But it wasn't. Real strength is knowing when to close the door." He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to defend himself. I didn't let him. "And just to be clear, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. I'm not interested in fixing something that was broken from the start. I've moved on. And you should too." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then, the words I didn't expect to come, not because I didn't want them, but because I no longer needed them. "I'm sorry, Tom." They came out quiet. Not performative. Not defensive. But too late. I stood, signaling the conversation was over. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, walking him toward the exit. He paused by the door, glanced around one more time, like maybe he was hoping to spot some piece of me that still belonged to the kid he once knew. But there was nothing left for him here. "I won't bother you again," he said. I nodded once. "Good." And then he left. The door closed with a soft click. And just like that, he was gone. Not in the dramatic way I used to picture it when I'd lie awake in that creaky childhood bed, fantasizing about cutting ties. Not with shouting or slammed doors or a grand speech that made everyone gasp. Just quiet. Final. I stood there for a while, one hand still on the doorframe, watching the empty hallway. There was a strange calm in my chest. Not triumph. Not sadness. Just stillness. For so long, I thought I needed a moment like that to feel complete. To confront Nick, say my piece, prove that I was more than the shadow he cast over me. But as it turned out, the real closure wasn't in anything I said. It was in who I had become. A year ago, if he had shown up at my job, I would have panicked. Maybe I would have tried to explain myself. Maybe I would have begged him to see me differently. But today, I didn't flinch. I didn't need anything from him. Not an apology, not his approval, not even his respect. Because I finally respected myself. I walked back into the office, nodding at Julian as I passed his desk. He gave me a look, curious, a little concerned, but didn't ask. Julian was like that. Smart enough to know when something mattered, wise enough to wait for it to come out on its own. Back in the conference room, I sat down in the chair where Nick had been just minutes before. And I thought about everything it took to get here. I thought about the night I left. How terrified I was, driving into the unknown with nothing but spite and a busted GPS. I thought about Dennis, and the creaky stairs that led to the rented room that became my sanctuary. I thought about early shifts at the cafe, pencil-smudged fingertips, aching feet, and that first moment Julian said, "You're onto something." All of that, the grit, the silence, the uncertainty, it had shaped me more than Nick's words ever did. He once told me I'd come crawling back. But all I ever did was stand up. And when I looked around at the life I'd built, this quiet, steady, solid life, it struck me how absurd it would be to ever return to the version of myself they once knew. That guy is gone. I didn't need to say goodbye to Nick. I had already said goodbye to the version of me that ever needed him. Later that evening, I walked the long way home. There was a light breeze, and the sun was low enough to cast that honey-colored warmth on everything. I passed the bakery that stayed open too late, the bookstore with the lopsided shelves, the apartment buildings that had come to feel like landmarks in my city. This was my world now. And no one had handed it to me. I built it brick by brick, in spite of everything I was told I couldn't be. When I got home, I opened the window. Let the air in. Let the moment settle. I never called my family back. Never unblocked them. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to prove. And sometimes, the best kind of goodbye is the one you don't say out loud. It's the one that lives in your silence. In the life you create without them. In the peace they no longer have the power to touch,